Ecological Restoration, where he coordinates the work of the board's Science and Policy Committee in their global partnership and collaborations. He acts as a liaison between the society and international bodies to facilitate a greater understanding of the principles and practices of ecosystem restoration and their relevance to policy and decision makers. Sasha is a member of the IUCN's Commission on Ecosystem Management and World Commission on Protected Areas, where he has organized and contributed to many publications and workshops on restoration. He holds a master's degree in development economics and international relations. Sasha, I leave it to you.
In this brief presentation, I will describe the various components of Target 15, explain why it's relevant and necessary, and suggest pathways that countries, communities, and corporations can pursue in order to meet this target. I will also touch upon the important role of the global biodiversity community. Target 15 of the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity addresses a number of serious challenges and proposes ecosystem restoration as a means of overcoming these challenges. For some countries, this is an aspirational target that they can work towards, while other countries certainly have the capacity to meet and exceed this target. We are all very familiar with the resilience of our own bodies. For ecosystems, this concept is quite similar. It refers to an ecosystem's capacity to absorb disturbances and adapt to stress. Put another way, resilience is the ability to bounce back and regain health and integrity. The negative impacts of increasing levels of CO2 in the atmosphere are now being felt in many ecosystems around the world. Thus, Target 15 focuses on minimizing these impacts by enhancing carbon stocks in biomass, soils, and sedimentation. Finally, ecosystem restoration and rehabilitation are now recognized as an important tool for addressing these challenges. Here we see a time sequence of a birch woodland restoration in southern Iceland, a fairly inexpensive effort with direct seeding and natural regeneration. Both forested and non-forested peatlands around the world present perhaps one of the greatest opportunities for restoration of these natural carbon sinks. Carbon emissions due to peatland degradation is a global issue which needs to be addressed by the Climate Change Convention. Here we see before and after photos of a cutover peat in Quebec, where the native vegetative cover has been restored and the water regime has been reinstated. In these types of peatland, we see significant restoration outcomes in less than 5 years. Along with Target 11 on protected areas, Target 15 contains an explicit measurable outcome that requires countries to restore at least 15% of their degraded ecosystems. In order to measure our progress, we will need to establish baselines as well as indicators of success. This map presents the opportunities for forest landscape restoration, part of the Bond Challenge, which was designed specifically for Target 15 and the REDD+ mechanism. It identifies on a global basis 15% of degraded forest landscapes, or 150 million hectares, that have the greatest potential for restoration and rehabilitation in a manner that strengthens the synergies among the climate change, biodiversity, and land degradation objectives, while also bringing benefits for livelihoods, food security, and the green economy. At Rio+20, the US, Rwanda, and Brazil pledged to restore over 18 million hectares of degraded forests as part of this Bond Challenge. Target 15 also requires specific restoration outcomes that are directly linked to the other Rio conventions, namely the Convention to Combat Desertification and the Framework Convention on Climate Change. Here we see the results of a rather simple and inexpensive approach taken in Kuwait, where the soil seed bank is fairly resilient and exclosures are an effective way of recovering biodiversity and its associated services. In many degraded ecosystems, particularly in the drylands, restoration is a prerequisite to sustainable use. Now the challenge is to bring back the livestock and manage a healthy rangeland. There are a number of global assessments that indicate an accelerated decline in the health and extent of most ecosystems. With this degradation comes the corresponding loss in biodiversity, the plants and animals that make us happy, and the ecosystem services that sustain and nourish our bodies and minds and those of other living organisms. the emphasis on restoration in targets 14 and 15 is because conservation alone is no longer sufficient to stem the loss of biodiversity and ecosystem services. The costs of restoration decrease as alternative approaches diminish in their effectiveness. The team study demonstrates that in certain ecosystems, the benefit to cost ratios can be fairly high, particularly when the value of all restored services are taken into account. Now, let us consider some of the factors that need to be in place in order for countries to make progress on Target 15. Political will and long-term commitment is essential, and ecosystem restoration must be integrated into national plans, as well as legislative and regulatory frameworks. Guidance, tools, and technologies must be made available to build capacity at the national and local levels. The role of partnerships is critical for leveraging scarce resources and establishing equitable systems of governance. It goes without saying that finance and other incentive mechanisms are absolutely necessary in order to achieve Target 15. Target 15 in the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity gives countries the flexibility to translate these global targets into national ones, while taking into account the social and economic contexts, as well as their sustainable development objectives. Here we see restoration linking targets 14 and 15. This mangrove restoration project in Tamil Nadu is one of many taking place up and down the east coast of India. Community involvement, sustainable livelihoods, and climate protection, and the empowerment of women represent significant co-benefits resulting from these activities. There's a strong connection between targets 11 and 15, and to leverage the opportunities for restoration and increasing the extent of protected areas. In many cases, restoration in and around protected areas will increase connectivity, enhance resilience, and improve the value of ecosystem services, such as water provisioning to the urban areas or recreational activities. Last month, the IUCN World Commission on Protected Areas published its best practice guideline on ecological restoration in order to assist protected area managers and others with cost-effective solutions. What is unique about Target 15 is that restoration emerges as a common tool for meeting the various objectives of not only the Rio Conventions, but many other global agreements on biodiversity and the environment. The Desertification Convention is now pursuing a target on land degradation neutrality. And the Climate Change Convention is exploring restoration within ecosystem-based adaptation in a project such as the one undertaken by Alcoa in Western Australia, where over 90% of the structure and function of the Jarrah forest has been meticulously restored. There is indeed a significant cost. But relative to corporate profits from mining and the restored biodiversity values for future generations, restoration is economically feasible. It is through government regulation and corporate responsibility that these efforts are incentivized. However, not all countries currently have this capacity. This is the Nature and Community Project in the Caribbean lowlands of Costa Rica. It's a joint effort between Chiquita Brand International, Migros, a Swiss retailer, GTZ, a German cooperation agency, and the Rainforest Alliance. Since 2004, the project has been rehabilitating lands degraded by industrial agriculture with the goal of connecting forest fragments among a number of private reserves and protected areas. It is part of the Mesoamerican Biological Corridor, one of the largest bioregional conservation programs in the world, that is seeking to consolidate biological corridors from southern Mexico to Panama. The integration of traditional management practices can reduce the cost of restoration while delivering significant benefits to local communities. In Shinyanga, one of Tanzania's poorest regions, traditional livestock management practices, clear land rights, and effective governance have been reinstated due to the cooperation of governments, NGOs, and communities. The gidili, or enclosures, provide benefits both in terms of subsistence and cash income, increasing family assets and improving health, education, and nutrition, contributing directly to the Millennium Development Goals while restoring biodiversity and ecosystem resilience. Here's an example of community forestry, which represents an effective participatory model for low-cost restoration. Long-term stewardship, and the equitable distribution of both costs and benefits. This model is being implemented successfully in both the developed and the developing countries. Private landowners around the world have an important role to play as we scale up restoration efforts. These lands represent critical linkages in the landscape and opportunities to increase protected areas and restore abandoned agricultural lands. There are a variety of market and non-market approaches to mobilize and leverage resources and provide incentives for ecosystem restoration. All things considered, ecosystem restoration does not have to be expensive. If we recognize the value of lost services, if we take into account the cost of hard infrastructure to provide services that nature provides for free, jobs and livelihoods can be created and improved. In harmony with nature, we're able to utilize traditional knowledge, instill long-term stewardship, and harness the effort of volunteers. We will inspire hope for the future. In closing, I will leave you with this quote from Gandhi, which conveys the urgency and the obligation we have to achieve Target 15. The earth, the air, the land, and the water are not an inheritance, but on loan from our children. So we have to hand over to them, at least as it was handed over to us. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you very much, Sasha.